All right, let's dive right in, shall we? Today, we're tackling Bitcoin. Specifically, we're looking at this idea of a final cycle.
Sounds intense.
It is. But, before we get all apocalyptic, we should probably back up a bit, make sure we're all on the same page. So, Bitcoin, we're talking about that digital currency, right? The one that's like completely independent.
Exactly. It's decentralized, exists entirely on a network of computers globally. No central bank, no government control.
Right, right. That's the part that always blows my mind. But this whole final cycle thing, I've heard whispers, something about halving. Honestly, it's a bit of a mystery to me.
Well, think of halving as Bitcoin's way of keeping inflation in check. It's baked right into the code. So every 4 years, the reward for mining new Bitcoin gets cut right in half.
Oh, okay. So less new Bitcoin coming into the system. And that would, I guess, push the price up, like basic supply and demand, right?
Exactly. And that scarcity, that built-in scarcity, it's a huge draw for investors. They see it as a shield against, those inflationary policies of central banks, the ones that can just print more money whenever they feel like it.
Makes sense. So with Bitcoin, at least there's a limit, right? Can't say that about the dollar or the euro or...
Right. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins. That's it.
Wow, 21 million. That's not a lot if everyone starts using it, is it? Like for the whole world.
That's the big debate. That limited supply, it's a double-edged sword. Makes it valuable, sure, but also raises questions about its practicality as a global currency. Like, would there be enough to go around?
Okay, I see. But limited or not, are people actually using Bitcoin right now? Or is it just like investors hoarding it, waiting for the price to skyrocket?
Oh, adoption is definitely growing. And it's not just individuals. Major corporations are getting in on the action.
Oh, really? Like who? Give me some names.
We'll take MicroStrategy, for example. They're currently holding wait for it, 1.2% of all the Bitcoin in circulation.
Whoa. Seriously, 1.2%. That's got to be, what, billions of dollars?
Almost $25 billion, to be exact.
Okay, that's wild. I guess they're betting big on Bitcoin's future, huh?
They are. Seeing it as a long-term store value, a hedge against inflation. And they're not alone. More and more companies are starting to think the same way.
So it's not just hype then. There's real serious interest from big players. What about governments? Are they like dipping their toes into the crypto waters?
Oh, absolutely. El Salvador, remember. They actually made Bitcoin legal tender, a world first. And now other countries are starting to explore similar options. Even the U.S. is planning to create a Bitcoin reserve.
A Bitcoin reserve? No way. Seriously. How much are we talking?
The goal is to acquire 1 million Bitcoins.
1 million. Okay, things are getting real. And then you've got Wall Street getting in on the action too, right? With those ETFs.
Exactly. Bitcoin ETFs are becoming more common, which means that pension funds, all sorts of institutional investors, they can all get exposure to Bitcoin now.
Wow, so it's really going mainstream, huh? Even with the price swings and everything?
It's definitely an evolving landscape, but all this interest, it begs the question, is Bitcoin just another investment, or could it actually become real money, the kind we use every day?
Right, that's the big question, isn't it? Everyone keeps comparing it to gold, digital gold and all that, but can you really picture, like, buying your groceries with Bitcoin?
It's an intriguing idea. I think it's helpful to think about Bitcoin's evolution as money in stages, right? First, you've got the store of value aspect, like you said, similar to gold, seen as a safe haven, especially during times of, economic uncertainty.
Right. But to be actual money, you need to be able to, like, buy stuff with it, right? Not just hold on to it.
Exactly. That's the second stage, medium of exchange. But for that to happen on a large scale, Bitcoin needs to overcome a major hurdle. And that hurdle is...
Oh, I bet I know where this is going. Volatility, right? The crazy price swings.
You got it. It's a valid concern. There's this economic principle, Gresham's law, that comes into play here. Basically, it says that when you have two forms of money, one good and one bad, people tend to hoard the good and spend the bad.
So, Bitcoin being limited and all, that would be the good money. And like dollars and euros, the stuff that loses value over time, that's the bad.
Precisely. And that's part of what fuels Bitcoin's volatility. People hesitate to spend it because they think it'll be worth more in the future.
So maybe I'll stick to dollars for my coffee for now. But what about that third stage you mentioned? What comes after store of value and medium of exchange?
Ah, the final stage. Bitcoin is a unit of account. Imagine a world where instead of pricing things in dollars or euros, everything is priced in Bitcoin.
Whoa. Now that would be a major shift. But realistically, are we anywhere close to that?
We're still in the early stages, for sure. And even if Bitcoin solves the volatility problem, there are other challenges, other risks. to consider.
Like what are some of the downsides we need to think about?
Well, we've touched on the volatility, which is driven by, market speculation. But there's also the regulatory landscape, which is still very uncertain. Different countries are approaching Bitcoin in very different ways. And then, of course, there's always the potential for technological risks.
Right, things like hacks and security breaches, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Vulnerabilities in wallets, exchanges. Those things could really shake people's confidence in the whole system.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag then. Huge potential, but also some real challenges to overcome.
That's a pretty good summary. And that's what makes this whole final cycle concept so fascinating. Are we heading towards a point where Bitcoin matures, stabilizes, fulfills its potential, or is it all just hype? It's a question that keeps a lot of people up at night.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about. I'm starting to see why everyone's so obsessed with this whole Bitcoin thing.
It's a wild ride, that's for sure.
And it feels like it goes way beyond just the money, Like I've been hearing about to decentralized finance, smart contracts. Is that all part of this Bitcoin universe too?
It is. That's what makes it so dynamic, so exciting. Bitcoin, it was just the beginning. Like, it opened the door for a whole world of decentralized technologies, applications. People call it Web3.
Web3, yeah, another one of those buzzwords. I never really understood what it meant, though. Like, how does it relate to Bitcoin?
Okay, think of it this way. The internet, the one we use every day, is mostly centralized, right? Controlled by these big tech companies, governments.
Right.
Web3, it's about flipping that. A more decentralized internet where users have the power, control over their data, their interactions. And Bitcoin, with its whole decentralized philosophy, it's a key part of that vision.
Ah, okay. So it's not just about replacing the dollar with Bitcoin. It's about building a whole new way of existing online, powered by this blockchain thing.
That's it. And that's what gets people fired up, It's about creating a more open internet, more transparent, more equitable, power to the people, not just concentrated in the hands of a few.
I get it. That's a powerful idea. But I mean, there are people who think this whole Bitcoin thing is like a house of cards, right? A bubble waiting to burst. What do you say to the skeptics?
Look, any new technology, especially one that shakes things up like Bitcoin, it's going to have its critics.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are legitimate concerns, right? The volatility, the regulations, the potential for, bad actors.
Yeah, we talked about some of those challenges. But what about the flip side? What makes you so bullish on Bitcoin?
It goes beyond the money for me. I really believe Bitcoin represents a fundamental shift, in how we think about money, value, power. It's about empowering individuals, challenging the status quo.
So it's not just about getting rich. There's a bigger picture here.
Absolutely. It's about giving people more control over their own finances, less reliance on those traditional middlemen like banks and governments.
I can see the appeal, for sure. But I gotta be honest, this whole Bitcoin, Web3, it's a lot to wrap your head around. If our listener is feeling a little lost right now, what are the key things you want them to remember?
The big takeaway. We're in the middle of a tech revolution, one that could change everything.
Yeah.
Bitcoin, it's just the tip of the iceberg. A peek into a future where these decentralized technologies, they're everywhere.
So even if Bitcoin doesn't become the one world currency, the tech behind it, the ideas, they're here to stay.
Totally. And that's why it's important to stay informed. Even if you're not ready to buy Bitcoin or whatever, this is a story that's going to affect all of us one way or another.
True. It's not just some niche thing for finance nerds. This is about how we think about money, about technology, about the world.
You couldn't have said it better myself. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, it's a conversation we all need to be having.
All right. So for our listener who's now totally hooked on this Bitcoin thing, what's the next step? Where do they go to learn more?
The internet is your friend. There are tons of great resources out there. News sites, educational websites, even podcasts.
Like us. Shameless plug for the deep dive.
Exactly. But seriously, be careful out there. There's a lot of misinformation too. Always double check your sources. And, watch out for those get-rich-quick schemes. They're never what they seem.
Wise words. Do your research. Be careful. Don't invest more than you can afford to lose. That's good advice for anything, but especially in a market like this.
Couldn't agree more. But beyond the investing part, I think it's crucial to learn about the tech itself, the potential impact it could have on society,
So it's not just about chasing profits, it's about understanding the big picture.
That's it. This is bigger than just money. It's about the future of technology, of finance, of how we organize ourselves as a society.
Wow, that's pretty deep. A lot to think about.
It's a profound topic, no doubt. one that deserves our attention.
Yeah, no kidding. Makes you think, doesn't it? We've talked about a lot today. Bitcoin, the tech, the potential, the risks. But I keep coming back to this whole final cycle thing. Like, what happens if, and I know it's a big if, but what happens if Bitcoin really does take over, becomes as widely used as, say, the dollar?
The billion Bitcoin question, right?
Right.
It's definitely a scenario that gets the imagination going, and yeah, a little bit of skepticism too, to be honest.
Right. Like, what happens to banks? To our entire financial system? Does it all just disappear?
It's the great unknown. And I think, yeah, it's safe to say it's making some of those traditional financial institutions a little nervous, but also intrigued. Some people believe that Bitcoin could lead to, well, a more decentralized financial system, one where the power shifts away from those big institutions back to individuals.
So, like, more control over our own money, less reliance on banks, on all those middlemen.
Possibly. But it's not a simple equation. There are also concerns about potential instability. A system like that, it wouldn't be regulated the same way as traditional finance.
Yeah.
So there are trade-offs, for sure.
Right. It's not like we just flip a switch and boom, Bitcoin world. There would be a transition, a process, probably a messy one, too.
Absolutely. And Bitcoin itself, it's still young, relatively speaking. There are technical challenges to overcome, scalability, transaction speeds, things like that. If it's really going to handle the volume of a global currency, those things need to be addressed.
So even if this is the final cycle in terms of price and adoption, there's still a lot of work to do on the tech side. It's not like we hit some magical endpoint and everything's perfect.
Nope. The evolution continues, and that's what makes it so fascinating, right? It's dynamic, unpredictable, a lot of unknowns, but with the potential to really change how we think about money, how we interact with it.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, but I gotta ask, for our listener who's been on this journey with us, what's the one thing you want them to walk away with? What's the big takeaway?
Honestly, more than anything, I hope they're curious, that they want to learn more. Because this whole thing, Bitcoin, crypto, it's a massive shift, a technological shift, but also a philosophical one. And it's going to impact all of us in one way or another.
That's a great point. We've just scratched the surface here. There's a whole world out there waiting to be explored.
A whole universe, really. And it's changing every day.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. A huge thank you to you for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Happy to do it. Always a pleasure to talk about this stuff.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. Keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.